And so from an academic standpoint, your 319 doesn't worry me that much because welcome to Application Renovation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you.
I would like to first find out from you, having gone through the application cycle now, where do you think you fell a little bit short?
I think my Mcat score.
Okay. And what happened with your MCAT score?
Well, I was originally supposed to take it in April, and then it got canceled twice due to COVID, which pushed it back to July.
Yeah.
And I think that my preparation, because I was confused on how to approach it, even though I was using Next Step and Khan Academy, I wasn't studying for it like I did in college, where I would repetitively go over content all the time, constantly. I was kind of like, do something and then check and then done, move on to the next.
Yeah.
And then I think I could have probably needed to review my tests better and more thorough and spent days on that rather than just, one day to review the test.
Yeah. So when you look back at your study habits and everything you did, you mentioned not reviewing well enough. What do you think prevented you from reviewing the tests as well as you potentially could have?
I don't know. I think I was just checking things off, like, okay, reviewed, done, because in college you have a test, like one test, it's a shorter amount of content. You really drill it into your head and then you take the test. I didn't do it like I normally would study for something. So
yeah, makes sense. The MCAT, completely different beast. And it truly is one of the biggest things that students don't do well is the review part, where they actually learn from question to question, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Right. And improving from there. So, okay. Any interviews?
No.
No interviews. Okay. So we'll take a look at your application. I think there are some things that can be done much better moving forward for your next application cycle. On top of, I think, the obvious thing that'll pop out is your MCAT score. But even with a good MCAT score, I think your application could have been improved a bunch as we go through it, which is why we do this.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and take a look at your application. And the first thing that jumps out to me that I always love to look at is when you submitted your application. You submitted it relatively early, July 12th. And you can see, especially for 2020, the review times were way delayed. Wasn't processed until 8/24. Were there any significant delays in that? Did you have transcript issues that caused some extra delay?
It was my MCAT score.
Well, the MCAT score wouldn't have delayed the verification process. So.
I think I was hesitant because I didn't have an MCAT score. So I was like, do I apply? Do I not apply? And then I just said, I'm just going to apply.
Just apply. Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely a recommendation to give to everyone watching this is apply to one school, even without your MCAT score, just to get in line, to get verified, because it takes forever, unfortunately. So scrolling down and looking at your application here, one of the things that I always like to point out is just how AMCAS qualifies students as socioeconomically disadvantaged or not. It's all based on your parents. So I just highlighted here, both of your parents have high school diplomas or equivalents and no higher education. Therefore, it marks you as socioeconomically disadvantaged. Just something I like to point out to students so they know what that looks like. Good thing, no big red flags, no institutional actions, misdemeanors, felonies, which is always good. And then we get to your grades. My assumption looking at your grades, because your grades, as we scroll through them, lots of C's, lots of D's, some withdrawals here and there. And then when you get to nursing classes, everything changed. My assumption usually when I see something like that is you didn't necessarily, and again, this is a guess, is that you didn't start out knowing what you wanted to do. And then once you figured out, like, I want to go into nursing, you had this passion that ignited your ability to study well and dedicate your time to that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I spent about 6 years in community college, not really ever going and only showing up on test days. And then with the age of 23, I was like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do, how I'm going to make money, and settled on nursing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can tell once you figured that out that your grades were great after that, going to basically all A's for the most part. And so great job with that big turnaround, which definitely helps looking at your application. So we'll get to your GPA, obviously starting out freshman GPA 286, 233, and then the big change junior year, senior year, once you went back to school, you figured out what you wanted to do, you have a nice big change in your GPA, this upward trend that I always talk about, which is really important and tells a good story. Solid post-bac GPA of a 3.8, graduate GPA just a few hours there for science with a 4.0.
Yeah.
And then your MCAT score. So just cumulative undergrad 319. So overall, this is where I always talk to students who say, okay, I have a 3.2 GPA. Let's round up. I have a 3.2 GPA. What are my chances? I'm like, I don't know. What does that 3.2 look like? What is the story behind it? And your story is started off kind of wandering around, not knowing what you wanted to do, and then you figured it out and you did really well. And so from an academic standpoint, your 319 doesn't worry me that much because you have the story of your upward trend that backs up that you found this passion, that you found what you wanted to do. Now for you, it's nursing, and so that's an interesting little twist there. So then we get to your MCAT score. We talked about that already. 498, obviously not a great score, not super horrendous, but not likely competitive for most schools, unfortunately, nowadays. And then we get to your extracurricular activities. And I really love picking apart extracurricular activities because this is where you have the opportunity to show who you are and what you've done. And looking at your first one here, there are some things that stood out to me that to highlight here. And looking at this first one where you're at the Regional Medical Center as leadership, you said as co-lead APC in the emergency department. Now I read that and I'm like, what the heck does APC mean? You have to be really careful with jargon in your specialty. And so APC, I looked it up, Advanced Practitioner Clinician or Advanced Practice Clinician. It's like, okay, I figured it was something along those lines, having you being an NP, but I had to look it up. And then a little bit later on, you have HCA partners, and I had to look that up. What's HCA? I didn't know what that is. So be very careful with abbreviations and jargon that are specific to your field that you're not defining for the reader. Looking at the majority of what you did, I think, in your extracurricular descriptions was to try to highlight strengths. And in this first one here, you marked this as a most meaningful, and you said at the very end that it required flexibility and adaptability, right? You're highlighting your strength. Look, I'm flexible, I'm adaptable, I got this, I'm going to be a great physician. And it's a common mistake that students make as they're going through this process. Instead of showing me who you are, you're showing me who you think I want you to be, right? You're saying, here are my strengths that I think I'm going to be a good physician. And my recommendation is to stay away from that. So ideally, you have this story here of being the medical director, whatever their name was, told us we had to create a pathway for this flu-like symptom. And you get into this story of really COVID hitting and what you had to do for COVID. Ideally, what you would do in this situation is tell the story. What did that look like? What did those first wave of patients look like? You basically said what happened, but you didn't really give any meaning behind it. You didn't give any impact about how you impacted it, how it impacted you, other than, look at me, I'm flexible and adaptable. So I think you could have told a story there to highlight a little bit more of who you are in that situation.
Yeah.
Looking at the next one here, you get into the lead nurse practitioner, this regional medical center. I highlighted regional medical center because it's all lowercase. And so there are a lot of grammar and typo issues that I found in your application that stand out, because the far majority of students don't have any, and you had a bunch, and I'll highlight those as we go. But regional medical center was all lowercase, which just kind of stood out. Like, that's a little bit weird. You said assist FMD. So again, I'm like, what's an FMD? I'm assuming family physician, right? MD, I'm assuming was MD. But I don't know, right? I didn't look that one up, but I'm assuming the medical doctor there. This is a great example of what I call resume writing. So you wrote this description like a resume. Assist FMD, serve as liaison, participate in annual reviews, represent APCs, attend department meetings, right? It's all just a list in paragraph form of your tasks. And it doesn't read very impactful. It reads very awkward because it's a paragraph form of a list. And so this is what I call resume writing, and I try to have everyone avoid it unless you truly are writing out a list of things, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend bullet pointing unless it's very specific situations for your extracurricular activities. And so when I read this description, it's just a basic job description. I don't see any impact. I don't see who you are in this. I just see what you did. Okay, so missed opportunity to highlight, right? You're this lead nurse practitioner. Show me how you led. Show me a patient. Show me something here that shows me who you are. Same thing with this ED nurse practitioner extracurricular description. Again, the organization name here, Regional Medical Center, again, was properly capitalized, just to highlight the difference of it changing back and forth, which just shows me most likely you got your Mcat score back. You're like, okay, I got to hurry up and get my application done, and you just rushed through it and didn't do a good enough job reviewing it before you turned it in. The description for this one, again, just a very basic job description, right? You say, I'm a nurse practitioner in the emergency department. I perform this, I do this, I do this, I document everything, blah, 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 right? Just a very basic job description that everyone who is in and around healthcare knows what you do as a nurse practitioner. They should. So just in my mind, that's just wasted space and a lost opportunity to, again, highlight who you are. The most meaningful experience that you have for this one, you tell this story, which I love, right? You get into the story of this 57-year-old with a history of diabetes presenting for DKA, right? Never managed DKA, so you seek help. Oh, you've never managed DKA, so you sought help. You tell this story and saying, looking back at the case, I wonder what I did wrong. Did I miss something, right? Because the physician took over the case. It's moments like these that I find myself wishing to be in that physician's shoes to have the knowledge to continue the patient's care. You're taking the opportunity here, again, another lost opportunity to highlight this experience. You're turning it into, why do I want to be a physician? Which I think is overstepping what this place is. And I was really interested to bring you on specifically because you have all this amazing experience as a nurse practitioner, and there are lots of NPs and PAs who I talk to all the time who now want to go to medical school, and I want to make sure that they're not making those same mistakes of, here's all this healthcare experience, and here's why I'm telling you why I want to be a physician. That doesn't belong in the activity description. That's what your personal statement's all about. That's why do you want to be a physician. So here, you could have told that story of this 57-year-old with diabetes. You could have highlighted that and talked about the impact that it had on you without necessarily jumping to, and it wasn't enough for me, and here's why I want to be a physician. And so I kind of continue on as we go through these activity descriptions. It's just a lot of the same things over and over again. One thing that kind of stood out, again, as a grammar thing, but I want to make sure, because it's very common, the experience description here, urgent care nurse practitioner, you said, this was my first job as a NP. Now, from a grammar standpoint, right, we're taught that A comes before non-vowels, and an comes before vowel words. But from a kind of common sense and how it sounds, right, it should be an NP, not a NP. So just a grammar thing, it just stands out as I'm reading it. And then what's interesting here, and again, why I wanted to bring you on, was you had here, as I started my first day seeing patients, I knew instantly this is what I wanted to devote my life to. And I read that, I'm like, well, obviously not, because you're applying to medical school, right? And so it's this like weird contradiction. I mean, I kind of understand that you're saying, I want to devote my life to taking care of patients, but there was just something weird about that kind of being tied to working as an NP. So you got to be careful with that as you're going through this, not to make a strong case for why you should stay in NP versus becoming a physician. And here, right, a lot of it job description stuff, and then you tell, I love the relationships I established with my patients throughout the time I was there, right? So a good opportunity to tell a story. Tell me a story of one of those patients and how they impacted you. Again, right, medical clinical for nurse, going back to 2012 to 2017 when you were working as a nurse. Again, basic job description in the experience description. And then your most meaningful, you told a great story here. The story of the 6-year-old retired nurse who came in, who became a quadriplegic. I was reading this. I'm like, how does someone like get a spinal cord injury falling off a bed? I'm like, oh Lord, like you get hurt in so many different ways. But it was a really good story, and it showed me who you are, right? You didn't take this story and try to sell yourself and go, I'm the most compassionate person ever. You told a story that showed you are, right? You told the story of making this person a homemade dinner because that's what they missed, and you brought it in. So that is the kind of story that when I say tell a story, that I want you to focus on. You're not overly focused on selling me anything. You're not overly focused on pushing an agenda. You're just telling the story of an impactful moment with this patient that tells me so much about who you are. Okay? So great job with that one. So just looking through here again, the typos and grammar stuff, I wanted to highlight one more here, was working as a bartender. You say, as a bartender, I worked as team member of our restaurant staff instead I worked as a team member. And then you said, I prepared alcoholic and non-alcoholic for patrons and waitresses, right? You missed the drinks word in there as well. So just lots of grammar stuff that stands out that even if you had a solid application, I would hesitate and question a lot of things. Even if you had great stats, I'm like, oh, like there's just so many grammar things here. Like it just tells me that you rushed things, you didn't care about it. Like what's going on here to cause this? So just something to think about.
Sure.
And that's where I tell students, like Grammarly. It's an amazing tool. They have a free version of it. I recommend the paid version while you're working through the application process because it helps catch so many of these things. All right, and then we get to your personal statement. And here's where I think you can make huge strides moving forward in your next application. Your personal statement was basically a resume in paragraph form, which is one of the most common mistakes that students make. So when we look at your resume or your personal statement, you say here, right off the bat, who would have thought this whole journey to become a medical student began nearly 20 years ago after a friend suggested I become a firefighter. Okay, very intriguing, interesting, it's okay. He saw the dedication and perseverance that I was putting into training for marathons, right? Selling. I'm dedicated, I can persevere, therefore I must be a good medical student, right? Or in this case, 20 years ago, I'd be a good firefighter. You talked about being an average high school student, lots of opportunities for personal growth. You get into getting your EMT certification, going through firefighter school. You have this love affair with medical science beginning, right? One of the most cliche things that you can say in a personal statement is, I love science, right? You even narrowed down and said medical science. I want to be specific here. I don't want to be a rocket scientist. I want to be a medical scientist. So avoid the cliches, right? And then further on in the paragraph, you said you learned how to cultivate emotional intelligence. Again, you're cherry picking these ideals and traits that you think make a good physician, and you're highlighting them, right? Earlier, you talked about your flexibility and adaptability. Here, you're talking about your dedication and perseverance, your emotional intelligence. It's like you sat down with a list and you're like, okay, I wrote about that, I wrote about that, I wrote about that, I'm good. I've showed all of the things that I have to be a good physician. I must be good. Okay? And then you basically have your resume, your timeline here. Working as a bartender, you're teaching yoga, you continue your fascination with medical science and nursing school. And then you said, I could only dream of being good enough for medical school. And that stood out to me because there's some part of your story in there about why you want to be a physician that you hinted at, but you didn't really explore it all. And so I wrote a big why here. Why did you only dream that you could be good enough for medical school? Did you think about medical school back then and then you said, oh, I'm not good enough, which is a common thing, but I don't know, right? And honestly, by the time I finished reading this, I really don't know why you want to be a physician. You never really told me why you want to be a physician other than you want, reading back to actually to your extracurricular descriptions, was you wanted more knowledge, more experience to take care of patients. And so your personal statement, I think you focused on, I'm going to take you through this whole process of where I got to and where I am now. But I think the story of why you want to be a physician is really missing from your personal statement. For me to connect to and go, okay, I see why you did this, I see why you did that, and I can see why you now need to be a physician. So again, just looking through your personal statement, you have some negativity in here a little bit, right? I didn't find it to be gratifying, talking about personal training. I don't think you need to add negative stuff in there, like I didn't find that gratifying, I didn't find this gratifying. Well, who's to say you're going to find medical school and medicine gratifying? So be careful with that sort of negativity in a personal statement. Again, just very timeliney, right? After 3 years of working in this and then in NP school, again, I love science, right? Human anatomy, physiology, medical science. And then you even add the other part of that cliche is I like science and I want to help people. You said here what is even more satisfying was applying the knowledge to help patients, right? I want to help people. So the interesting part here, right? You're talking about NP school, but you were doing that as a nurse. So again, where was that difference there? You do have right above it, again, this kind of hint of medical school, still not considering medical school as a possibility. Why not? Right? Why didn't you consider it a possibility? So again, these lost little opportunities to strengthen your story as to why you went down this path and why you're doing this. You get into a story here, right, of a patient, which is great. I love the story. But I think it lost the opportunity to reflect on that story and focus on why you want to be a physician. You did a very common thing which students do is they reflect on it and talk about what they learned, right? You said working directly with patients has taught me how heavy the situations can be and that even in the most unfortunate circumstances, I want to be there in any way I can, right? So again, you took an opportunity where I tell students, focus on why that made you want to be a physician. You turned it into, here's what I learned, right? As if I know everything about being a physician, I should be a physician. That you can't really connect the dots in that way. So missed opportunity there. And then again, I highlighted here, you have the 60 tabs of Tylenol, and there's a typo there. The 0 in 60 is like a lowercase o, so something weird that stands out there. And then your conclusion here, right? Your conclusion is, I feel that my lifelong commitment to learning, again, as if everyone has to come in saying, I'm committed to learning, therefore I should be a medical student. So again, just cherry picking these ideals. And ending with what I thought was interesting, this ends the journey of getting in my own way. And it kind of ties back to those little hints of medical school in the past, but I have no idea what those hints were because you didn't dive into them. And so the ending is confusing to me because I'm like, I don't know what you mean by getting in your way because you didn't really tell me other than you thought about potentially or not considered medical school as you went on your journey. So I get to the end of this and I say, I can see your whole path because you just laid it all out for me, but I still don't know why you're doing this. Again, other than going back to your extracurricular description, where you said you wanted to be in Dr. So-and-so's shoes to have all of that knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
What was the process for you to write your personal statement?
Well, first I read your book.
Okay.
And tried to write it on my own with my mom. And then I hired someone to help me off of Facebook.
Okay.
And he helped me write it.
Okay. And when you got to the end of it, you finished it, you said, okay, this is my final draft. What was your thought process in terms of the story that it was telling?
Well, the guy that I hired, he sits on AdCom's application things, and he thought it was like the best thing ever. So,
Okay.
so I just was like, okay, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then I just wanted to highlight some of your schools here. So you didn't apply to a lot of schools. Very common for non-traditional students not to apply to a lot of schools just because typically non-trads are a little bit more limited with location, with family members, and other things. Is that the case for you? Is just location you're a little bit more restricted?
Yeah, location. And I actually wanted to apply to a DO school close to me, but I didn't have a high enough MCAT. So the school I wanted to go to, I couldn't even apply to. So
interesting. Okay. And how did you find out that it wasn't a high enough MCAT score? Did they tell you specifically, or was it on their website?
Yeah, it says minimum of 502.
Interesting. Okay. And so, again, from a school standpoint, what was interesting to me was all of these schools are Northern California except for Kaiser. I'm assuming you added Kaiser in there just because it's free.
Yeah, and it's close. It's kind of close to me.
Okay.
So.
Interesting. All right. So really, I think, obviously, going back through the application, talking to you, obviously MCAT is a big thing. GPA-wise, I don't think you have a lot of work that you need to do there, if any. Okay. It's going to be MCAT, and it's going to be telling your story much better through your extracurricular descriptions and your personal statement.
Okay.
Questions?
No.
Okay.
So, well, yes.
Yeah.
So for every extracurricular activity, every one of those, I should write a story, not just list things I do, even if it's not my meaningful thing.
Yeah, ideally, I think.
Okay.
And it's hard in 700 characters, but it's very doable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ideally, that's what you're doing. And you don't have to go overboard, and not everything is going to have an amazing story that shows this massive impact. So if you're really struggling, don't worry about having a story, but try to show impact as much as possible.
Yeah.
The job description / what did you do is less meaningful because most of the things people are going to know what the basics are of that job. I want to know who you are outside of that.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other questions?
No.
All right. What is your plan for reapplying? Are you going to reapply this next cycle so you just go back-to-back cycles?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm retaking the MCAT at the end of April.
Okay, good. So we got an MCAT date. One of the biggest things that I want you to think about is as you're studying for the MCAT, try to start working on your application as well so you're not turning around, studying only for the MCAT and working and doing everything else, and then as soon as the MCAT's over, rushing your application. So take your MCAT breaks, work on some parts of the personal statement, etc., and then when you're done with the MCAT, start polishing up your application and then start working on your secondary essays as soon as possible as well.
Yeah, that's what I plan to do.
The one thing to think about for you, again, and why I wanted to bring you on as an NP, is your story is going to be different for your personal statement because your seed, as I talk about in my book, is going to be why you became a firefighter / EMT. That's more your seed than anything else. And then obviously there's this story of progression of more and more knowledge, more and more responsibility and skill set to take care of patients, culminating with the knowledge one day where you're like, crap, I need to go to medical school. But really,
Yeah.
really focus in and don't shy away from the fear and doubt that you had, because that's part of your story as well. It sounds like there was fear and doubt
Yeah.
and uncertainty about going to medical school that you just kept kind of shoving back in the closet
Yeah.
before finally getting to the point where you've kind of maximized your training on the path you're on now, and you need to go to medical school to finish up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yep.
And a common thing that students focus on is the negative side of it, right? Why being an NP isn't enough. Or for you, right, why being an EMT wasn't enough, why being a nurse wasn't enough, why being an NP wasn't enough. Therefore, medicine's the next step. I think you really need to focus on the care that you want to be able to provide, not necessarily just the knowledge. Right? Knowledge you could go home and study every night if you wanted to. You can learn how to take care of DKA without going to medical school, but it's the piece of paper and the hospital credentials that allow you to do much more moving forward through medical school, and what that's going to let you do for your patients in the future. Focus on that aspect of it.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Yep.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. And hopefully,
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully there's good news in the future. We'll get you on Mission Accepted for
Okay.
the next cycle.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.